So today I want to talk to you a little bit about the foundational API project as well as analytics. Because really what I want to talk about is web APIs. So best practice when building web APIs in Sitecore is to implement um, services API controller, which is an extension to web API for Sitecore that provides a couple additional features as far as security goes and control over it. And I also tried to standardize on how we register routes. Right now, the analytics feature project is the only project that leverages it, although I've used it plenty of times on projects that had to register custom APIs. And it's pretty much a pretty lightweight foundational project. There's not much in here. There's really two things to kind of help you with it. One is for registering routes, just to make things easy, especially if you want to enable session. So out of the box, when you do a web API, it's not going to support session state, and you actually have to add a session route handler to enable that for that. And if you want to work with Sitecore Analytics and the tracker specifically, you need to support session. Now, supporting session isn't enough. The tracker actually won't be initialized when you do a web API call. So one of the things I've done is added some extension methods to Services API controller. One specifically to get your tracker. So what this will do is return a tracker, and it'll actually make sure it starts tracking. And then the other thing it'll do is you can actually pass true if you want your web API call to show up in Sitecore Analytics as an interaction, but most of the time when you're setting up a web API, you don't want it tracked in Sitecore Analytics. So by default, track request is set to false, which we'll just call tracker.current.page.cancel. So to see this in action um, in feature analytics, which is a web API that has a lot of client-side APIs for doing things with analytics. Um, so you'll see a lot of code like this where we'll initialize a tracker to this.getTracker, tracker, which is calling the extension method. And then it'll double check to see if it's not active, because if it's not active, then you really can't call our analytics API. So you may not need that code most of the cases if you know that the tracker should, or Sitecore Analytics should be enabled on your site. You won't have to do that check. So, I mean, you could take a look at some of these. These do things like this. This method actually, get tracker, returns details about what happened or what events occurred in that particular page or the last page that was called. This is actually called by the client-side object model to push data through segment.js to actually report on report to other analytics providers when events occurred on the server side. So for instance, if you set up goals on your pages, this will go pull them down the fact that they were triggered server side and then publish them through Segment, so that Google Analytics or Web Trends or anything else that's plugged into Segment will get notified. Register interaction, similar to client-side API for registering an event. It's actually more than an event. It's treated as a high level interaction, so it will show up in Path Analyzer. Do keep in mind interaction details requires a unique GUID, and I do provide a template type if you want to create your own client-side interactions in the marketing control panel that you can then fire. This is perfect if you're doing a single page application. You can set up a bunch of client-side interactions in your marketing control panel. You can wire this up, and each state of your spa will then show properly in the Path Analyzer. Register event is just really around raising goals. End session is so useful. I use it all the time to kind of force Mongo to flush and then check Mongo. Most cases, I'm calling this at the JavaScript console just to kind of do that. Outcome registers outcome, which is another useful thing if you're leveraging those, especially around engagement plans. So that's the analytics controller. I'll probably do a deeper dive just to kind of show you the segment piece of it and kind of some of the auto tracking I do for some of the components that come in Sitecore Foundation. But that's kind of a good overview of the controller. The other thing I want to show you is register analytics routes, which implements register route space. So this is how we register a particular route. So in this case, we're registering a route with analytics, Sitecore API, SF analytics action. Analytics is the controller. Index is the default in case the action is left out. And this just makes it much easier to register routes instead of having to go through everything and set up the session handler and things like that. So I prefer do it in one line, not have to worry about it. Now, the other thing you'll need to do whenever you register an API is to include a routes config. One of the practices I've used is have a zfeature.route just to make sure it registers last, because some of the web API handlers are earlier bound, and just to make sure this occurs last, I do there. There's really two things you need to do. One is register your initialized pipeline processor to register those routes, and the other thing you need to do is enable your controllers to be called outside of the internal box, which is kind of the default behavior. And then you just have to enable your controllers, and that's really it. So hopefully that's helpful. Thanks.